Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Stacy Widelitz. Stacy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here again.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when you were on before, as part of our Dirty Dancing trifecta, we got to talk to you a little bit, but we didn't really get to get in depth with your story, which is I find to be extremely interesting. So, as we often say, every musician's story starts somewhere, and if I recall, yours actually started out on the flute and being told that you didn't have any musical talent, ironically.
Yes, that's exactly right. It was very funny. It was in fourth grade, and it was part of the public school music program. And the music teacher, not the band director, but the music teacher had a sign-up sheet, if you wanted to join the band program. This was at the beginning of fourth grade. And, you could list your instruments of preference. And I remember my first choice was cello because I loved the sound of the cello. And I don't even know if flute was on my list or if, I just put it last, but that's what I got assigned. And so my parents, rented the flute and the whole thing. And I could not make heads or tails out of that thing. I mean, it's all, fingering and, and even the staff, the music staff didn't make sense to me because it just didn't relate to something that I could see, So after about a month or so of struggling with this thing, the band director, Mr. Severoli, finally sent me home with a note to my parents, which they didn't like too much, asking them to return my flute and that he was dropping me from the band program because, as he put it in the note, I exhibited no musical ability whatsoever. And the great comeuppance on that was many years later, my mother actually ran into him. And, she said, are you the same Severoli who flunked my son out of band? And so his wife was with him and said, why would you do something like that? He said, well, it was my job to make sure that, the kids that had musical ability could move ahead. And this was in 1997, and I had just been nominated for an Emmy for a score that I did for an ABC documentary. And he gave her the perfect straight line. He said, out of curiosity, what is he doing now? And so she said, he's a professional composer, and he was just nominated for an Emmy. And evidently his wife started hitting him saying, see, Mr. Big Shot, Mr. Big Shot. So it's a very funny story. It was a great moment for my mother also.
I'm sure it was. Yeah. And Ian Anderson got to sleep well, knowing he didn't have you for competition.
That's right. Exactly. Or James Galway. So, yeah, it was interesting. And then, my parents had picked up this old upright piano, put it in the basement, and my brother and I would pick out tunes with one finger, just by ear. And then my cousin this was also in fourth grade, but more in the winter now. My cousin was stuck at our house in a snowstorm once with my aunt, and he was a child prodigy classical pianist. And he would have been about 14 at this point because I was about 8. And he's playing Chopin and all this on this out-of-tune piano. And I was enthralled. And he taught me how to play chopsticks in a couple of minutes. And then he said, oh, I see there's a method book here. Let's take a look at that. And he pointed to the staff, which made no sense to me with the flute. And he said, you see that little blob sitting right under what we call the staff? That's middle C, and it's right here on the piano. And he played it. And I looked at it, and I looked at the staff, and I said, oh. And so he said, let's see what else you can learn. So after about an hour, he ran upstairs where my aunt and my parents were in the living room, and he said, you've got to get him piano lessons. He just went through the first 10 weeks in an hour. Wow. So, and he's reading both bass clef and treble clef, you've got to get them lessons. So that's when I started piano lessons.
Yeah. Tell me this at this point, Stacy, what music were you gravitating to, personally?
Yeah, well, I was exposed to a lot of different types of music because neither of my parents were musicians, but they were very artistic and they listened to a lot of music. My father tended toward jazz and classical, and so there was a lot of that playing at any given moment. And then my mother loved folk music and show tunes. So that's a pretty broad spectrum there. And then once the Sgt. Pepper album came out, I started getting interested in rock and pop as well, and started listening to a lot of bands. But I really had very broad listening habits. I listened to a lot of different types of music and a lot of show tunes, actually. To this day, I still love musicals.
Yeah. Tell me this, was Sgt. Pepper the first album that you bought, or was it something else?
I can't remember. I would have been 10 or 11. I don't think I started buying records until I was about 11 or 12. My parents may have actually bought that record. But the other record that was hugely influential, my father came home with one time. And he said, "Hey, I saw this, it looked interesting." And it was B.B. King, Blues on Top of Blues. And so I would have been about 11 at this point. And it was B.B. King in studio sessions with a horn section. And he put this record on, and we both were just transfixed. It's a great, great record. And that got me on this path of, I have to learn about the blues now. And that became a thing where I was shown a basic blues scale, and then eventually a 12-bar blues pattern that you could, improvise with the scale. And that started me on this path of improvisation and making music up. So that was a very, very pivotal moment.
Yeah, well, one thing that I've always noticed with people who are passionate about music, whether you are an artist or whether you are simply someone who listens, actively, every time you're exposed to something new and you like it, it takes you down another path. And the next thing you know, your musical tree has branched out in so many different directions. And then you end up picking up on those artists, on their influences. They were influenced by, this blues artist or this, composer or what have you.
Right, exactly. And it also, branched me out into listening to other artists. Like I really, to this day, love Jimmy Smith, the Hammond organist, and listening to that. And then that got me into Oscar Peterson, and probably getting into Oscar Peterson taught me that I'm not going to be a jazz pianist because nobody can be as good as Oscar Peterson. And I went different ways, fortunately, but yeah, each one leads to something else. And listening to the soundtrack from A Clockwork Orange that Walter Carlos, then eventually Wendy Carlos, did, got me on this path of synthesizers. And now I'm listening to Morton Subotnick and Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and all this crazy, crazy music. So that, opens up your ears sonically and harmonically also. So
exactly.
Yeah. But it was a lot of fun. And one album that my father played probably, if not every day, at least every other day, he had a recording of a great singer named Bill Henderson doing a song called Joey Joey, which is from the musical Most Happy Fella. And it's just this quiet, introspective, beautiful rendition, very understated, And the fun thing was, many years later in California, I got to introduce my father to Bill Henderson.
Oh, wow.
Completely flipped out. And Bill Henderson was very funny. My father said, "I have your record with Joey Joey." And Bill Henderson said, "Oh, you're the one that bought that." So it was very
fun. That's great when you have the opportunity to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's actually one of the fun things about getting to a certain level in the music business, is you get to meet some of your boyhood heroes and interact with them on a peer-to-peer basis, while still, remembering, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually talking to you. So it's what happened with Bill Henderson was, when I moved to Malibu in 1995, I was talking to a neighbor after just a few months living there. I was out walking my dogs, and she asked me what I did, and I told her. And so she said, "Oh, we have another musician on the block. He lives in the pink house over there. He's a piano player." And, the way she said that made it sound like, he played piano on the weekends in the Ramada Inn. It's like, oh, he's a piano. And so I said, "Oh, out of curiosity, who is it?" So she said, "Oh, his name is Horace Silver." And I said, "You're kidding." So she said, "Is he famous?" And I said, "He's like one of the greatest jazz pianists there is. And I've been listening to him since I'm 12 years old. So he lives right there." So she said, "Yeah, right there." And she said, when he's in town, he takes walks around the neighborhood with his headphones on, listening to music. So sure enough, like a month later, I'm walking my dogs, and there's this guy coming down the street, and it's Horace Silver, and he's listening to music and kind of moving. And then he stopped to say hi to me and to the dogs. And I looked at him and I said, "Oh my, you're Horace Silver." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, I'm a musician, and I've been listening to you since I was a kid. And I said, "And I think also you know my old jazz teacher, Lou Stein." And he said, "Yeah, I know Lou Stein." So we became friends. And he invited me to his 70th birthday party at his house. And Bill Henderson was there at that party. Artie Shaw showed up at 90 years old. And it was quite the party. So anyway, like a year later or so, I was online with my parents to see a concert in LA, jazz concert, and here comes Horace walking down the line with Bill Henderson, and he sees me and he comes over and he says, "Oh, I want you to meet my parents." And I said to my father, "And this is Bill Henderson." So it was like this moment where my father was just like levitating off the ground, because he was a big Horace Silver fan as well. So it was just, it's stuff like that that's really, really kind of fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you, to digress, here. Now, you talk about, listen to Horace at age 12, what have you. It was shortly thereafter that you started playing gigs locally, and somehow managed to get yourself into the Union at age 15.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing. Yeah, I had joined a band when I was 14 or so. That was ostensibly like a little jazz group. And so it was, I think the original version of it was drums, piano, me on piano, bass, trumpet, and sax. The trumpet player dropped out. Then the original drummer left, and so we got a different drum. The original drummer was actually Rod Morgenstein, the great drummer whose birthday is today, actually. And but we started once it was the four of us. Somehow we heard about a place that was looking for music that was in our town, called the Port Royale Room in the Kings Grant Motor Inn. And we auditioned, and they liked us. or the manager liked us, but then he pointed to me and he said, he looks a little young. Because at that point, to play in a place that served alcohol, you had to be 18. So they were saying, oh, and the manager was, he's a big Italian guy. And he said, I don't care how old he is. I just need a piece of paper that says he's 18. So we're a little disappointed, and I get home, and my father's background was in commercial art and printing. And so he said, how did it go? And I said, well, we got it, but we can't do it because I'm underage. And he said, how much are they going to pay you? So I said, $40. And he said, oh, they're going to pay the band $40. And I said, no, they're paying each one of us $40. And he said, oh, they're paying you $40 for 2 nights. And I said, no, they're paying us $40 per night, Friday and Saturday. And he said, you're going to work 2 nights and come home with $80 cash. And I said, yeah, which was, if I was working at McDonald's, it's like 10 times as much. And this was a lot more fun. So my father said, let me see what I can do. And he disappeared in the basement. And a couple of hours later, he came up with my birth certificate, and he had altered it to make me 18 years old. And you could not tell. I mean, I looked at it and I said, you have another career. This is really amazing. So we were able to do that job. And it was, I think it was 4 or 5 weekends that we did it. And it was like this mysterious world had opened up with drunks and waitresses in black leotards and all this. And I was sitting there, I was like, this is great. And but that led to then I was getting some work at a couple of the local catering halls, like the wedding and bar mitzvah circuit.
Right.
Water. And those were union houses. So, and I was beginning to get some, work as well. So you were supposed to be 16 to join the union. And my parents drove me into the city, and we went up and met with one of the vice presidents of Local 802. And he said, you're a year too young. And I said, yeah, but I'm getting this work, and I, want to do things the right way. So he said, well, there's supposed to be a proficiency test. So I said, well, like what? So he just looked at me and said, all right, name the notes in a G dominant 7 chord. And I knew music theory. So I said, G, B, D, and F natural. And he said, okay, you're in. With his stamp, then I was a member of the musicians union, and eventually transferred to the LA union. And last year I got a lifetime membership card from them. And if you want to feel old, get a lifetime membership card from a union. It's like, oh God, how many years is this now? So
yeah, but you started young.
Yes, I started very, very young. Then in my late teens, I was going to college for music, and I'd gotten into synthesizers at this point. And I started doing some work for a little recording studio in Connecticut, writing scores for them on synthesizer, using a multi-track that I had to create, sound on sound and build music that way. And then I was studying with my aforementioned jazz teacher at this point, Lou Stein, and he had a workshop on Monday nights that I was attending also, and I was writing music for them. And it was Lou actually who said to me at one of our lessons, he had, which I didn't know at first, he had made an absolute fortune writing jingles, which explained his lifestyle more than him being staff pianist at CBS. But he was the one that said to me, he says, you're a really good piano player, but if you ask me, you're a better composer. And I think that that's the path that you should take in music. He said, you write easily, you're writing good stuff for the workshop, you're writing and getting paid for it already. He said, and if you do that, you might make more money, you won't have to tour, you might get more respect. There's a lot of advantages to it. And on the drive home, it was about an hour drive back home, it was like the clouds parted, and it was like the voices singing, he's right, you know. And, so that was really the pivotal. I was about 20 at that time. I'd also been working summers with a dance company, the Jose Limon Dance Company, which is one of the greatest modern dance companies in the world. And I was working with them in their classes as an improv pianist. So my job was for 4 to 5 hours a day, just sit down at a piano and make stuff up all day long. And according to the rhythm and the tempo and the steps that the teacher was, you know, giving to the class. And that was a great training ground because, you know, it's like, it's not like, oh, let me think about this. It's just instantly make stuff up. And I think that that helped me with the scoring work because it was taking movement and emotion and turning it into music. And that's basically what scoring is.
I was just going to say, so, you know, I'm always intrigued when you have someone who's successful in their field and things that happened to them prior to that success that at the time would seem like just, you know, it was a project to do, but would end up having such a huge impact on what they would end up, you know, doing really well at. Yeah, right. Always that amazes me.
Yeah, it's you know, sometimes I'm asked to lecture, you know, guest lecture a class of college students, or, you know, aspiring composers or songwriters or whatever. And one of the things that I always say to them is it's really good to be focused, but it's really bad to be focused with blinders on. Mm-hmm. Because I said, there's so much life and learning in the periphery that if you're just like this, you might miss the thing over there that ends up being, oh, that ended up being one of the greatest things I've ever been involved with. Because you don't know. It's like, keep looking around and say, oh, that looks really interesting. And you never know. You know, the little recording studio that I worked at in Connecticut eventually started to expand, and we started to do big industrial shows and local jingles, things like that. And through that, I met an actor who was a great musical comedy actor, and he had moved to LA. And so when I moved to LA, I looked him up, and through him, I met Patrick Swayze. So you just don't know. When you look at the paths, it's very fascinating.
Yeah, that's why one of the things that I try to ingrain in my son is always pay attention, be aware of what's going on around you, because there's opportunity. But most people, as you said, they're focused on the task at hand or what have you, and they don't see those things.
Right.
And they end up getting lost. And, you know, opportunities lost are not a good thing.
Yeah, and then when the opportunity is there, the other thing is to really grab it and do the absolute best that you can, because you never know who's going to hear it or see it or whatever it is, you know, whatever the medium is. You just don't know.
Exactly. Well, for you, one of those opportunities was to do the theme for a new TV show.
Yeah, that was my first. Are you talking about the Richard Simmons show?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hysterical. It was I was 24, and I was at that point living with a great singer, Wendy Fraser, and she was 23. And I was doing the work at the recording studio, still playing clubs at this point also. And her father was a television producer, Woody Fraser. And I was getting a little bit frustrated with the studio in Connecticut because it just seemed like it can only go so far. And Wendy, and I had met Wendy's father on one of his trips to New York, and I'd met him a couple of times. And I played him some of the music that I was doing, and he said, "This is really good." And we liked each other. He's an interesting guy. And Wendy said to me one time, he said, "My dad is doing this new show. We should talk to him about the music." And so I said, "Okay." So we called him. We both were on the phone. And he said, "Okay, I'll let you submit, but I'm not giving it to you. Here's the deal." He said, "I have to like it. The star has to like it. My wife has to like it because she's a co-producer. And the syndicator has to like it. If you can satisfy all four, you got it. Otherwise, no." Which was fair. And everybody liked it. We came up with this theme that just everybody liked. I remember the first time we played it for him over the phone from, he was in LA, we were in New York, and I played it on the piano. And Wendy did like a vocal lead doing do 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 do, which ended up being the final version. And I remember there was this pause, and he said, "Hey, that's really good." And then he said, "Nora, get over here," which was his wife. And so we played it for her, and she said, "Wow, that's really good." So we sent a cassette, and then we got news that, word that Richard liked it and that the syndicator liked it. And so 3 days after that, we were on a plane flying to LA to do the recording session with LA studio musicians, and which was terrifying. It was completely out of my comfort zone. But that was our first national theme. And much to everyone's surprise, the show became a hit. And Wendy and I were discussing it over the course of that year and realized that to use that success as a wedge to get into the business, we had to move to Los Angeles, which I was not happy about. I was really a New Yorker. I'd been to LA a couple of times, one time during major fires. And I remember being on the roof of the hotel with some guys, and ashes were falling. And I said, "This is like Pompeii. They're gonna find us in 5,000 years with screams on our mouths, And so it was. I wasn't a fan of the town, but we made the move, and it was the right thing to do. And we expected not to work again for at least 6 months to a year, but we actually ended up getting another theme for a daytime show within 3 weeks of moving there. And that meant we had to have a meeting at NBC in Burbank. And as we were walking around the lot, this blue Mercedes convertible drove past us. It was Johnny Carson. And I turned to Wendy and I said, "We are in Hollywood. We are really in the entertainment industry. Johnny Carson just drove by." And it was like really, one of those moments of, wow, this is very disorienting after all those years in New York.
Yeah, that theme was the Regis Philbin show, correct?
Yes, that was, but not the one that he became famous for later.
No, the morning show.
It was a morning show that I think it ran for about 6 months. And, but that was, it was also a fun experience. Worked with some great musicians on that who became friends, and it was fun.
Yeah. Now, tell me this, Stacy. How did you make the leap, if you will, from doing the theme songs to TV shows to scoring TV shows?
That was a process. It's not so much a leap as a crawl, uh, a long slog through the underbrush. Because really, to start doing scoring work, a composer at that point needed an agent. And I started approaching agents. And here I was, a working composer, but doing these daytime television themes. That's what Wendy and I were kind of typed into doing that stuff. And the agents would invariably say, we don't represent people doing the work that you are doing. We represent, scoring. And it's not just about the music. We need to see what you can do with a piece of film dramatically. And so I said, well, how am I supposed to do that if I don't have an agent that gets me a film? And so invariably they'd say, you need to figure that out. And so now it's already a few years of this, and I had been taking some classes in film scoring mechanics at UCLA. They had started this program for adult and professional students, which was excellent. And around 1985, I guess it was. So I'd been in LA about 4 years at this point, still no agent. And I was talking to a music supervisor on a show that I was working on. And I told him about this dilemma. And he said, look for a really good UCLA or USC graduate film. And, do the best that you can with the score. And if it's a good film, it gets seen by the industry because the director is going to use it as a resume or as a demo, essentially. So it's going to get passed around the industry. So I said, oh, that's a good idea. Where do I look? And he said, well, a lot of times they advertise in Dramalog, which was an industry newspaper. And so, each week I'd look through Dramalog, and I saw an ad that said a composer needed for UCLA graduate film, classic 1950s horror suspense, which was my thing. I mean, that's, I loved all those movies and all this. And it said, send tape and resume, the post office box. And it was to Chicken Thing, care of post office box and all this. So I was like, well, that's intriguing. And I had, the year before, I had gotten a state-of-the-art sampling synthesizer, the Emulator 2, which was like the big, other than a synclavier, was like the big sampler. And that could do a lot of stuff. It was really pretty amazing. String sounds were good. It had pipe organ, which was fantastic. And so I put together some music in that genre and sent it to Chicken Thing, along with a resume and then a note, to Mr. Thing. And I heard back from this, I got a call from this guy, Todd Holland, and he said, I really liked your tape. I'm considering a few composers. Can you come to UCLA tomorrow? I want to screen it for you in the black and white work print. So he said, it's 12 minutes long. So I said, yeah, sure. So I met up with him at UCLA, and he screened it for me. Also, it was very funny. We laugh about this now because we've stayed friends. He sat about 4 rows behind me, which is a total intimidation move. Knowing there are only 2 people in the theater and one sitting 4 rows behind you, So anyway, it's the black and white print, no sound effects, no music, obviously, and the whole movie had only 2 lines of dialogue. Everything else was told visually. And it was basically about a little kid who has been watching horror movies on television, and he goes into his room and there's a storm and there's a blackout, and he goes to find his flashlight and glasses, which were on the dresser. And as he approaches the dresser starts to morph, and it eventually turns into a giant monster chicken. And the movie was called Chicken Thing. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe how good it was. It was funny. It was suspenseful. The little kid was great. So when it finished, I turned to Todd and I said, I have to do this movie. And he was a little taken aback and he said, why? And I said, I know exactly how to do this movie. I said, I grew up watching, the movies like the kid is watching, and all that music is just in my head. And so I said, you've been talking to other composers. How have they said that they would record the music? So he said they would get a group of student musicians together and do it that way. And I said, that's going to sound like crap. And so I said to him, I have this machine called the Emulator 2. You heard a lot of the sounds from it on my tape that I sent you. Why don't you come to my place tomorrow and I'll show you the machine and show you all the sounds that it can do and how it can be used in this scoring environment. So he agreed. And that night I was in the living room, and I was still living with Wendy at this point. And I sat down at the piano and I was playing around with some things. And I started playing this theme. I'm actually sitting at my piano right now. I don't know if it's a legal issue, but I started playing. Like this very creepy, very, so I thought, okay, that's the theme for Chicken Thing. But I wasn't going to tell him that I wrote it. So Todd came over and I was showing him the machine, and he was very impressed with all the sounds, and especially the pipe organ. I said, got to use pipe organ. And so we went back into the living room, and I was sitting at the piano. He was on the couch, and he said, so, I mean, what would an approach be? Think of a theme from a movie that you think might work. And so I played him what I just played, more extended version of it. And his eyes widened. He said, oh my God, that's exactly, wow. What's that from? And I said, it's from Chicken Thing. I wrote it last night. And so he said, you're kidding. And I said, no, that's the theme for Chicken Thing. And so he still didn't make a decision. I think he called me the next day or the day after, and he said, I want you to do it. And then the skills come into play, because when I got together with him, he said, okay, I see 4 places for music. There's obviously the opening credits leading into his room. There's the end credits, and there's the transformation sequence. And I said, you're missing 2 spots. And so he said, what? And I said, when he pokes his head out the door, we can tease the theme. And then the next morning after the whole transformation sequence, where you hear a garbage truck in the background, he goes to get the paper. I said, that also. And he said, really? I never would have thought of that. And I said, you're the director, I'm the composer. But and I said, and the good thing is, if I write it and you don't like it, you can hit mute. And I said, always remember, you can't mute it if it's not there. So he ended up loving those sequences. And then he said an interesting thing to me when I played him what I wanted to do for the end titles. end credits, he said, I want some sort of grand theme, like the love theme from Chicken Thing, to come in. And I said, really? That's fascinating. So I wrote this thing and I played it for him over the phone. He said, that's it. And he was exactly right. And I trusted him enough at this point to realize that he was exactly right. And it was like this, all of a sudden, this beautiful theme comes up, goes for like 8 bars, and then disappears. And it makes the end credits work. So anyway, we ended up having such a good time working on this film that we became friends. And he, about 6 months later, moved across the hall from me. So we were neighbors for 4 years also. But what happened was, this film was screened at UCLA, as part of their screening of the graduate films. It received a standing ovation there. Then it started to make its way through the industry, and it started to create a sensation. And it, I think, immediately won some awards. It eventually won a Student Academy Award, but it won 30 awards around the world. But then Todd, when he was still living up in the Valley, called me. During the days he was working as a waiter at the Century Plaza Hotel. And he called me and said, I came home from the Century Plaza and I couldn't believe who was on my answering machine. And I said, who? And he said, Steven Spielberg. And I said, you're kidding. I said, it's really him. He says, yeah, I checked. It was really him, saying that he saw Chicken Thing and that he loved it and he wants to talk to me. So Todd is working during the day, and at night he's being courted by every major agency in town. CAA is taking him out, ICM, William Morris, Triad, all the big agencies at that time were taking him out to like Le Dome and Spago and all this. And meanwhile, I'd been circulating the VHS as well. And I'll never forget, I came home on a Friday with Wendy, and I hit play on the answering machine, and there was a guy on there who said, my name is Brian Gersh. I'm the soundtrack agent at Triad Artists. I've now watched Chicken Thing 10 times in a row. Here's my number at the office. If you miss me at the office, here's my number at home. And I turned to Wendy and I said, I have an agent. And so she said, how do you know? And they don't give you their home number for nothing. And so I met with him the following week and I signed to Triad Artists. And at that point, it was before Dirty Dancing happened, but I was friends with Patrick Swayze. And by coincidence, he was with Triad as an actor. So now we're with the same agency, which then came into play when Dirty Dancing came up, because we had my music agent do the deal for us.
Yeah. Again, crossing paths with people or projects that have an impact that upon initial meeting, you have no idea where it's going to lead.
Yeah. I mean, with Chicken Thing, I mean, you think, oh, student film, big deal, but it was a student film unlike most student films. And I did what I mentioned before, which was I really put my all into that because I realized this is an opportunity. And Todd was interesting. At one point, as we're mixing the film, mixing the music into the film and the sound effects, he turned to me and said, it's just so interesting because I've been watching this film for 3 years and now you've completely transformed it into something else. And so I said, that's the process. And it's you'll never look at it the same way. We ended up doing some work together again on a show, Erie, Indiana. And then he did a movie called The Wizard. And a friend of mine and I wrote the end title song for that. So, and Todd and I are still in touch. We're still friends. So that was always a great relationship, and we both are so grateful for Chicken Thing and that whole experience.
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, and it was interesting because he had, even at the beginning, he really wanted it to look like a Hollywood production. So he had a production company name, that comes up, Grove Street Productions, I think it was. And so I said to him, I said, you need the musical logo to go with that. Because you think of United Artists or whatever, when some music comes up. So I wrote like a little thing just under the production company credits. So it was, we really treated it like this is the most important thing right at this moment. But it was great. And it was just amazing to me. 5 years of writing daytime theme songs, and one 12-minute student film gets me picked up with a major agency.
Funny how things work.
Yeah. But I also owe it to the music supervisor, Rocky Moriana, who gave me the bit of advice, because he turned out to be exactly right.
Yeah.
So that was another lesson of listen to the professionals. When you don't know what you're doing, listen to the professionals. Get their advice, and don't pretend that you know what you're doing.
Exactly. Now, if I recall, it was also in '85 that you got to work on an ABC TV special, an update on That Was the Week That Was.
Yeah.
And it was a one-time shot deal, but say if I remember right, that didn't turn out to be a pretty cool experience for you.
Oh, it was a great experience. I mean, it was writing music, but also music directing the show, and was shot before a live audience. But the best part of it was the co-hosts were David Frost, who was the host of the original, but his celebrity co-host for this show was Anne Bancroft. So I got a call from the producer saying Anne wants to do a song on the show, and we're writing up a spoof of the song Trees, based on the Joyce Kilmer poem. I think that I'll never see a poem lovely as a tree. And so they took it in the direction of Acid Rain, where it was like, I think that soon we'll never see a poem lovely as a tree, about acid rain. So he said, so you're going to go to Anne's house and rehearse with her. They've got a piano there. And I say, this is also Mel Brooks' house. And Mel Brooks, he was like God, the funniest man on earth. And so they said, yeah, we don't think he's going to be there, but, you can work with Anne. And then I was talking to the producers, and I said, so how are you going to stage this? And they said, well, it's just going to be Anne on stage. You're going to be at the piano right off camera. And so I said, so just her? And I said, what if there are trees around her where the trees are actually disguising a barbershop quartet, and that unexpectedly they lean in and start singing at one point? And so the producers looked at me and said, that's great. And they immediately find the barbershop quartet. And it worked great. It was actually very funny, because there are these fake trees around her, and then they start to sing. But I went to Anne Bancroft's house. She was the nicest person, unbelievably gracious. But the thing that got me, I think of her from The Miracle Worker or The Graduate, where she speaks so beautifully. And as soon as I walked in, she was holding back this big dog. And she said, don't mind the dog. Then she said, do you want some coffee? And I looked at her and I said, where are you from? So she said, I'm from the Bronx. And so I was stunned at how strong her New York accent was, and how she's able to then, go to Benjamin in, The Graduate. And then I would occasionally run into her in the grocery store. LA at that time had one of the first high-end grocery stores, the Irvine Ranch Farmers Market. And so she was incredibly gracious. And we had fun working together, and the scene went great. Interestingly, when we were shooting the show in front of the live audience, Mel Brooks was in the audience. And at one point, Anne Bancroft flubbed a cue card line. She said, because this is the Reagan era, she said, and President Ronald Reagan said, something like this. Director comes on and says, Anne, we got to back it up. And she said, why? What did I do? And you hear this voice from the audience that's unmistakably Mel Brooks screaming, you said Reagan. Who says Reagan? It's Reagan. And the audience was hysterical. And then 3 years later, I got to meet him and sit with him in his office for like an hour and a half, which was great, because I was up for a movie that he was producing. And I told him, I said, I worked with your wife a few years ago. And he said, on what? And I said, that was the week that was. And he said, oh, I was in the audience. And I said, I know, because you yelled at her from the audience. And he looked at me, he says, who says Reagan? So he remembered it exactly. But I ended up not getting the movie. It was down to me and two pretty big composers. But, to sit with him for an hour and a half, he's from the same part of Brooklyn that my parents were from. And so we were discussing all of that. We were discussing jazz music. I got to ask him about a scene from one of his movies from High Anxiety in the piano bar. And I said, I played piano bars a lot in my day. And the scene in High Anxiety at the piano bar is just great. And I said, what I love is when you crack the mic cable like a bullwhip, and you cut to Madeline Kahn, and she's obviously a little turned on by it. And he said, I saw Bobby Darin do that in Las Vegas. He was up on stage and he cracked the mic cable like a bullwhip. And everybody was like, and he said, and I was on the floor laughing hysterically, because he said, that was the funniest thing I'd ever seen a performer do. So, as I always say to people, I said, yeah, I didn't get the movie, but it was the greatest rejection I ever had.
Exactly.
So,
that's funny.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, to keep things moving forward here, we're talking about 85. It was 2 years after that things, really took off, but it all started prior to Dirty Dancing. So now you mentioned about meeting Patrick at the acting class, what have you. Take us through that whole story.
Well, we met in his class, and first off, he introduced himself as Buddy, because that's how friends and family knew him. And I was looking at him. I played piano for my friend Gary, the one that I mentioned that I knew from New York. And so that brought me to the acting class, and it turned into a discussion about musical theater and with the teacher, Milton Kitselis. And then the class was taking a break, and this guy came over to me and he says, hi, I'm Buddy. I really liked your talk about music and theater and all this, and your playing. And I was looking and I said, you look really familiar. And so he said, well, did you see The Outsiders? And I said, no. And then he said, have you seen Renegades? I said, no. And I said, it's not that kind of familiar. And so then this blonde woman came over and he said, this is my wife, Lisa. And I said, okay, the two of you are always working on a black 240Z on La Jolla Avenue on the weekends. And they said, yeah, how do you know that? And I said, I live right around the block from you, 2 houses away. So I pass you every weekend. And we became friends. The two of me and Wendy and Buddy and Lisa, and we started hanging out. And we, because I had this background in dance music as well, we would talk about that and theater and all sorts of stuff. And we became good friends. So then in 1984, he was working on a movie called Grandview, USA. And he called me up one day. Obviously, he knew I was writing music for TV. And he said, they're looking for songs for Grandview. I've had this idea for a song for a couple of years, but I could never get anywhere with it. Do you want to work on it with me? So I said, yeah, sure. Come on over. So that evening, he walked around the block with his guitar. And he had been in bands in high school and had been on Broadway and Grease, so he musical guy. And he only had 2 chords, C to E minor, but lots of lyrics, like 4 stanzas. And the opening lines intrigued me, which was, she's like the wind through my tree, she rides the night next to me. And I liked what he had melodically. And I said to him, I like those opening lines. I don't like the 3rd and 4th line. And so he got a little, defensive. He said, well, what would you say? And so I said, I was thinking, nature imagery. So I just said, she leads me through moonlight only to burn me with the sun. So his reaction was, what does that mean? And I said, I don't care, just write it down. And, but when we realized that She's Like the Wind could be the hook of the song also, and the title, and not just the opening line, that's when we had something. And I moved to some other places musically, and eventually we did a really good demo of it to present to the Grandview people, with him singing it, Wendy doing some background vocals, and this little interplay with him at the end, which ended up staying in the final version. I programmed the synths and drums, brought in a guitarist, and it was a really good demo. And ultimately, it was not used for that movie. So the demo sat around for a couple of years, and then in 1986, he was shooting Dirty Dancing on location in Lake Lure, and he called me and he said, I played She's Like the Wind for the producers and director, and they really like it and they want it for the movie. And so I said, you sure they're not just jerking you around because you're the star of the film? And he said, no, there's a music producer that they want you to talk to, named Jimmy Einer. And so I said, okay. So it sounded serious. But I was not that thrilled about it, because it was a little low budget film that was supposed to, was not getting much good press, and was supposed to be in the theaters for a week and then go away. So it wasn't a big deal. But I said to Buddy at the time, I just signed with Triad, so let's have them make the deal for us, because that way we're a unified block, because we're both with the same agency. And and we knew they didn't have very much money up front. My agent knew that as well. And so what they did do was retained us 100% of the publishing. So, which ended up being, worth far more than any upfront money could have been. So we did the final version of it with Michael Lloyd producing it, who added a couple of just brilliant things to it, including a bar of 5, which I would never have thought of, to make a little more drama at this one point. Sleigh bells at the end, and this chant, just a fool, she's like the wind. And but it was interesting it was a great band that he had hired. I had Paul Lime on drums, one of the greatest session drummers of all time. Lawrence Juber on guitar. He was from Paul McCartney and Wings. Dennis Belfield on bass. I mean, just great band. And he had a keyboard player on the session whom I knew, Stuart Levine. And Stuart was doing these synthesizer parts, and I was in the recording booth with Jimmy Einer was there. And he said to Mike, those synthesizer parts just aren't right. And he turned to me, he said, what did you do on the demo? Or what did you use on the demo? And I said, I used my OB8, which was an Oberheim 8 synthesizer. And he said, where is it? And I said, it's 10 minutes away. And he said, go get it. So I ended up playing all the synthesizer parts, just basically recreating what I did on the demo. And then, interestingly, also that morning, Michael Lloyd turned to me and he said, do you know what we're doing today? And I said, yeah, we're recording She's Like the Wind. He says, no, we are recording a major hit song, mark my words. And I've been in the business long enough at this point. And I just said to him, I said, Michael, will you call my mother and tell her that? Because I don't think she believes, has ever believed that I could make a living doing this. So, but that was like November of 1986. And the movie didn't come out till August of 87. So by this point, I was getting some scoring work on some films, and so it was off my radar entirely. And also 3 weeks before the movie came out, there was the soundtrack album was released, and it just died. And then the movie came out, and the soundtrack album shot to #1. And then everything just exploded. So it was crazy. I got a call from Michael saying that you're getting a gold record for the soundtrack album. And I was like, oh, fantastic. And then he said, a week later, or a week and a half later, I called him. And I said, when do I get the gold record? He says, oh, you're not getting a gold record. Now you're getting a platinum record. So I said, you're kidding. And he said, no, it sold 280,000 copies last Sunday. Wow. And so it was, and when I finally did get that first platinum record, it was triple platinum. Wow. So, and then the one behind me here is 11 times platinum. And I found out recently, quite by chance, that last year it was recertified at 14 times platinum, which makes it one of the top 30 albums of all time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Tell me this, Stacy. When Triad got you the 100% publishing in lieu of the upfront money, what was your expectations? What were you hoping for it to turn out to be?
Well, I really wasn't hoping for anything. It was just like, oh, okay, all right. Well, they did the right thing. But once we realized, oh my God, this is a hit, and the soundtrack is a hit, and I remember getting my first royalty statement from BMI that included the first few months of She's Like the Wind being a hit. And I was still living in my old apartment, and Todd Holland was living across the street. And I was sitting in the foyer of the building looking at this check. And he said, what is it? And I showed him the check. And he said, oh my God. And I then looked at him and I said, oh my God. And he said, what? And I said, this is for the writer's share. I'm getting another one of these for the publisher's share. And so then he looked at me again. He just said, oh my God. So it was pretty amazing. So, and then over the years, it turned into, this great thing because, the song's been licensed for many, many things since Dirty Dancing. And I'm involved in that licensing process because I own my half of the publishing. And it was always, Patrick's team that was on the other side. Now I deal with Lisa, his widow. So we're still very good friends, and we have, the business that binds us as well. So it's being used right now. I think it's still on the air in a ad campaign in the UK that's absolutely brilliant. That's basically a Highland cow riding a motorcycle across the Scottish Highlands while She's Like the Wind is playing. And it's for Virgin Media, their internet provider in the UK. So, and the song's been in 500 Days of Summer. what other a bunch of movies.
There's been like a dozen movies, or that have used it. Tell me this, Stacy. There's been 2 cover versions where they added a rap section to it, turned it into a contemporary hit, if you will. What's your take on those revisions to your song?
Well, there's one of them that came out in Germany in 2006 that is absolutely fantastic, and they reharmonized it a little bit also, and was very, very clever. And then there was an American version that was basically a copycat of the German version. Same beat, same reharmonization, all that. And also very good. And that was interesting because it was the rapping was done by Puerto Rican reggaeton artist named Lumi D. And it did pretty well here in the States. It went to number 16, I think, on the Pop 100. And the German version went to number 2 in Germany, so that did really well. And something's in the air these days because 4 new covers of it have come out within the last 4 months.
Wow.
A young Polish singer who's incredible, this young woman named Roxy. She's like 18. So she was not anywhere near being born yet when the song was a German rap version came out that's actually in German called Wie der Wind, shot in Berlin, and 2 dance versions, one by a British artist named MD and the other a Parisian Algerian artist named LB1. So there's something in the zeitgeist these days. And I was just in Paris a few weeks ago, and one of the managers, was asking me what I do, and he said, "I heard that you're in music from one of the other people who works there." And so I told him, what I've done, what I've written, and he said, "Really?" And he pulled up his phone. He had just downloaded LB1's version of the song. So it was like, "Oh, great!" I said, "Thank you for helping support part of my trip."
Exactly.
But
I'll tell you. Go ahead.
It's a great thing, to have something that's the unimaginable. I mean, it was one thing for it to be a hit initially, and at the time, I remember thinking, "Oh, this is so much fun," but the fun's going to last for a couple of years, and then it dies off from the radio, and nobody hears it again. But the fact that it's been on the air consistently, for 35 years all around the world is just unbelievable to me.
Yeah. Tell me this. Compare your disappointment from when it was rejected for the Grandview USA soundtrack to your elation when you got your 11 million sold award sitting behind you.
Well, it was, there's always that element of sucker, but it's also, providence in a way, because who knows who's ever heard of the movie Grandview USA? It was a terrible movie. So that faded into obscurity very quickly. And then Dirty Dancing is, Dirty Dancing. So it's a phenomenon. So every step of the way has been some sort of fun little bit of, gratitude. Like when the song was climbing the charts at the beginning of 1988, I had a messenger knocking on my window every day, which was the rabbi's son next door who watched the top 40, listened to Casey Kasem. He would knock on the window and say, "It's number 57 with a bullet." And I said, "I know, Svi, my agent called me." So it's, but thank you. So it was, little fun things just along the way that are just great. So.
Yeah. Well, then continuing your work with Patrick, Cliff's Edge from Roadhouse.
Yeah. a third writer was brought in on that, which I didn't care for that too much. But you know, that it's funny because it just shows nobody knows. There was so much excitement around that soundtrack and the song because they thought, you know, they already have this huge hit. And then Roadhouse gained more of a reputation later in its later life as a kind of a cult classic. At the time, it was not received well critically. It didn't do all that well at the box office, and the soundtrack didn't sell. So it wasn't that big a deal for either of us. But we got to work together, you know, another time anyway, because he and his wife did a dance film loosely based on a stage piece that they did in the mid 80s that I was involved with. And I scored the dance film, and that won an award for me at the Nashville Film Festival. And so it's, you know, we continued being friends up until his death. So it was, you know, that was, and I spoke at his memorial service back in 2009. And you know, that was very moving as well. So, but yeah, it was, you know, it was a great relationship. And, you know, the fact that we have something that we did together, that's something that I mentioned at his memorial service. You know, just that I'm grateful that our names are linked forever, you know. But yeah, so it's really interesting. My battery is dying here. I may have to plug in for a minute, but so I'd say we probably have another 10 minutes or so, which I mean, we're getting on anyway.
Yeah, I said I don't want to overstep bounds and keep you too long here either. I didn't realize what time it was. It's been so interesting talking to you. So
no, it's interesting stuff because it's, you know, people say to me, you know, it's so unique. And to me, it's just my life. You know, it's when you kind of step back from it and say, oh, not everybody does this. You know, not everybody gets to do this. Not everybody, you know, gets to have a song that is a massive hit. Not everybody gets to sit in a room with Mel Brooks for an hour and a half, or work with Anne Bancroft, or even Richard Simmons, or you know, to me, it's just what makes things interesting. And you know, I continue to make things interesting because, as we were, you know, discussing off camera, a whole new creative realm has opened up for me through black and white photography. That started quite randomly when I was in Italy in 2015. I bought a new camera that had a black and white function, and I'm obsessed with old black and white movies and black and white photography in general. And I started taking pictures of people, and it turned into a thing. It got recognized by a photographer friend here in town who said, now you have to bring a camera with you wherever you go. And I've had 3 shows now of my work, getting a 4th one in June. The Nashville airport informed me that they're going to do an exhibit of my work toward the end of this year. I've won 5 international awards, sold like 12 pieces, and in communication with photographers all around the world. And it's you know, just a whole new avenue that, like we were just talking about, keeps things exciting and fresh, and opens up this, you know, I was never thought of myself as a visual artist, and now I am. So it's great. And, you know, in Paris a few weeks ago, I'm just walking around with my camera, taking pictures of what I see. And it's fun, and it's very exciting because it's so different. And it also shows that the creative process and finding new things creatively is not tied to age either, because this was a later in life pursuit.
Right.
So,
and it happened organically.
yeah, it happened just, I mean, I was sitting with a gallery owner when I had put together a portfolio of about 15 photos. And this is a woman I've known for 10 years. And she just looked at me and said, "This is incredible." Or actually, her first statement to me was, "Tell me again how this happened." So I said, basically, I bought a new camera and started taking pictures of people in black and white. And, but it became a thing that I'm very grateful for now. And now I plan traveling around that. So, and there's that moment in the morning when you just kind of wander out onto the street with the camera, and it's just like, well, let's see what I see today. And it's a very Zen-like experience because you get completely out of yourself. I call it the anti-selfie, because instead of being obsessed with yourself, you're carefully observing everyone around you. And that takes you out of your own head, and it becomes a very interesting process. It's almost like live performance, or in writing music. Sometimes I would come up with something and then I'd look, listen to it again, and I'd say, where exactly did that come from? And I realized that I was in a different zone when that came out.
Have you found a city or a country that serves as a more of a muse for you?
Well, London, definitely, and now Paris for sure. I went to Paris for the first time last October and was so stunned with how beautiful the city is that almost as soon as I got back from that trip, because I was in London, then Paris, then back to London, I did two things. One was I booked 2 weeks to Paris, which was the trip that I completed recently. And I also started studying French because unlike Berlin and Denmark and those places, an amazing number of the French do not speak English and or speak it barely. So I figured I'm going to try to communicate. And that's been a whole other fun quest, is learning a new language. So, so yeah, but London and Paris so far have been the ones. It just seems like the people that you see and the environments that they're in, and then in Paris, the cafe culture, and in London, the whole pub culture. It's just fascinating faces and people.
Tell me this, Stacy, what's one place that you would really like to go to capture images that you haven't yet?
Well, probably Rome, and then also any place in Spain, like Barcelona, those places. In the back of my mind also are more exotic places like Calcutta, just because the street life is so in your face. But I think before that it would be, Rome and Spain. But I booked a trip yesterday, actually, back to London and Paris for the fall. So another 2 weeks. This time what I think I'll do is fly into London, then take the train to Paris, because it's only 2.5 hours, and then go back to London for another few days and then come home. So, but we'll see. We'll see. I've gotten a lot of great shots in Nashville. Two of my photos that have won awards are in Nashville. One from downtown and one a devastating picture of the aftermath of the tornado from 3 years ago. So, so any place where there's people, you can find something interesting to photograph.
Exactly.
I don't go downtown Nashville and shoot the tourists. I can't stand that. I don't want to see the bands of bachelorettes with the.
I was gonna say no bachelorette parties.
No bachelorette parties. The inappropriate headwear and clothing and all that. I'm just like, nah. And it's not Nashville anyway. It's not. Those aren't the people that live here.
Right.
So
that's the Nash Vegas part of it.
Yeah, that's the Nash Vegas part of
it. Exactly. Well, tell me this, Stacy. I know there's a lot of stuff that we just haven't had time to get to. Is there anything that you want to make sure that we include before we wrap this one up?
No, I've seen you, scroll my website, which is great. I appreciate that. Thank you. And if you go to the website, there's new photos coming up, when I post them to Instagram. So you can click on that and it links you to my Instagram page, which is just at Stacy Widelitz. And I don't use it for food and stuff like that. I only post my black and white photography to Instagram.
No omelet pictures?
No. So no avocado toast or Taco Tuesday or anything like that. But it's exclusively for the work, and I keep that updated. I post something new every few days, and a lot of recent stuff from Paris is on there. So that's basically it. So it's just I think the theme of this is, how do you keep things fresh and how do you keep things exciting, and then looking back with a sense of appreciation as well.
Right. Well, that sounds like a perfect note to sum things up here with, Stacy.
Well, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Always enjoy speaking with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And perfect timing, because I'm at 4% left on my battery. So
well, on that note, we're going to wrap this one up. Everybody, thank you for watching. Stacy, thanks for being here. Have a good night.
Thank you.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.